Earlier, I showed you rose hips and how to find them on roses. Now we're going to talk about removing the seeds from those hips and the stages that those rose hips go through. What we're going to use to remove the seeds or harvest the seeds from these rose hips is a scalpel and an X-Acto knife. We'll be showing you how to use those here in just a couple minutes. But right now I want to talk about the stages that the rose hips go through. This one here, as you can see, is nice and fat and plump. We just harvested that one from a rose about 3 or 4 days ago. And it's nice and fat and juicy and all plump. You'll see here, this one is a little bit older. It's a little dried out, a little more dried out, and all the way down to this. As you can see, the orange color here goes from like a light orange all the way down to a very dark orange. And these here have completely dried out. They've been on our rose bush for quite some time. You can even see a dried leaf there. These are still just fine to get seeds from. They're just a little different method of opening them up to get the seeds out. And you'll see here in just a little while that even though they are really rough looking, really dried out, crispy, crunchy, that there's still viable seeds inside of these. We can harvest all of those seeds and plant them and propagate our roses. Now I've zoomed out a little to show you the tools that we'll be using. Just a normal sheet of white copy paper. I find it makes it easier to find the seeds once you've opened the rose hip up. A scalpel and an X-Acto knife. And we'll show you how to use those in just a second. We'll be right back. Now what I've found that works best for me is to just remove the flower petal top, just like on a carrot. Insert your X-Acto knife, pull down, and then twist. And usually they'll just pop right in half for you, just like that. That way you get easy access to the seeds. Then we switch over to the scalpel and we just pry them out. Some have one, some have several seeds inside. But you also want to get all of this little hairy fuzzy stuff out. Those are all the stamens that were left behind that did not get used to fertilize the seed. Okay, we've removed all of the stamens out. Now you want to be really careful with this stuff. Once it's dry, these little hairs or these little stamens here will itch like mad. They will drive you crazy itching. This stuff is even worse than fiberglass. It blows all over, you can inhale it, it gets on your skin, and will drive you crazy trying to get it off. Now we're also going to save our rose hip after we take the stem off. We're going to save our rose hip to make rose hip tea, or the meat of the rose hip. Hey, there's a seed right there. We just pop him out. Scrape off all the little stamen shafts, or I like to just call them fuzzy hairs. I'm not going to be pretentious and use all the Latin terminology here. We're just going to show you what works. Take all that out and your rose hip is good to save. Let's do one of the dried out ones. Oh, by the way, we're just going to separate our seeds over here. I like to use just a regular plain piece of white copy paper because it makes the seeds a lot easier to see. So we can just take them out and flip all the chaff out of the way. Okay, again, you can either take all of these dried up petal parts off, just give it a good push and twist till they open. If you nick one of the seeds, that's perfectly fine. We're going to scarify them anyway before we plant them, so a little nick in them is not going to hurt at all. Okay, then just give them a little rub with your X-Acto knife or scalpel. Now you want to be really careful here because some of these seeds are pretty well stuck in there. If you start prying around with this scalpel or an X-Acto knife, you could really hurt yourself pretty well if one of these seeds happens to pop out while you're prying up on it with a scalpel. Once you've done 4 or 5 of them, you'll get the hang of it. You'll be able to scrape along the inside, find where the seeds are, and just pry on those areas or manipulate those areas to get at your seeds. Okay, now we have a mix of chaff and seeds here. You got just a bunch of junk in the way. The easiest way to get rid of that, just lift a little and sift. There, we can see a seed right there. This white paper makes it really easy to find where your seeds are and where the chaff is. We'll remove him. Now we only got 2 or 3 seeds out of that particular one. Depending on the type of the rose, how well it was pollinated, you could get 1, you could get a dozen seeds from each one, from each rose hip. So on a white piece of paper, it's really easy to tell where the seeds are and where they aren't. And it kind of contains your debris area too, so that you can just remove all the debris at one time rather than trying over and over and over again to pick up little tiny minuscule pieces. Okay, just to cut. We can stick our thumbnails in and separate it and look for seeds. Nope, no seeds in that one. Let's try one of the orange ones here. That probably has at least 2 or 3 seeds in it. Again, just split it in half. Put in your X-Acto knife or scalpel or pair of scissors. You know, anything that you can give it a good slice with. Then just use your fingernails to pry it apart into 2 halves. They'll usually split pretty easy. You can work with 1 half at a time, using the stem right here to help hold it in place while you search for seeds. There. There's one large one. There's the second large one from that hip. We'll just place those off to the side. We're going to let those dry for a couple days, and then we're going to stratify them in the refrigerator for about 90 days, and then we'll scarify them. We'll give them a little nick. Well, actually, we'll use a little sandpaper to erode some of the coating off of those seeds. The easiest way to find a fertile one, once you've scarified them with the sandpaper, just stick them in a little water, a cup of water, a bowl of water, whatever. Just enough so you can get all the ones that are fertilized will sink to the bottom, and the ones that are not will float to the top. That way you don't waste time planting seeds that are not viable. You can just plant the ones that are. That's the easiest way to tell which ones are viable and which ones aren't. The whole secret to planting anything is a numbers game. We want to plant enough seeds so that we can go through and cull out the ones that we want and discard the ones that we don't. So if we have 50 seeds growing, or 50 seeds that have sprouted, we can whittle it down to 10 particular plants that we want, or that look the healthiest and look the most viable, and use just those. You could do 100 and whittle it down to 10. You know, it's totally up to you. But it is a numbers game. The more you have to work with, the better your odds of being successful.